In the Rust Belt, where steel and glass factories once blazed like the beating heart of the town, only ruins and weeds remain. The old glassworks still stands, brick walls stained and crumbling, windows shattered, like a lone tombstone rising among dead streets. People still whisper about the accident that happened there, a worker trapped inside the furnace when it exploded. Nothing was left but ash and a charred mask. Yet they believe his screams fused into the molten glass, haunting the place forever. No one dares linger too long, but the factory remains, silent, as if waiting for the next soul to step inside and catch their reflection in the fractured glass. Nisin. Evelyn returned to the town on a grey afternoon, the sun smothered by thick clouds, the streets so empty they seemed to have forgotten human breath. She walked slowly, each step measuring the distance of a lost childhood. This town had once lived by the glow of its furnaces, by the sound of molten glass poured into molds. Now it breathed only rusted metal and the dust of decay. Beside her walked Mark, who had never left this place. Hardened, aged, his eyes bore the wear of a lifetime tied to factories long dead. Behind them, Sam, Evelyn's grandson, stepped quickly, his sneakers crunching on shards of glass scattered along the pavement. He had no memories of this town, only curiosity for the abandoned glassworks whispered about in rumors. From afar, the factory loomed like the carcass of a stranded leviathan. Blackened brick walls, rust-stained sheet metal roofs, windows gaping like hollow sockets. The remaining shards caught the fading light, scattering it into jagged reflections, making the entire structure resemble a corpse stripped bare to its bones. As they drew closer, a figure hunched beneath a power pole came into view. A homeless man, his coat ragged, his hair matted into clumps, his dull eyes fixed on them, lips moving as if muttering some secret prayer. A chill ran through Evelyn. But when she blinked, the man was gone, swallowed by emptiness, leaving only the acrid scent of ash and a rolling bottle of liquor. The factory's main door hung ajar, its hinges shrieking a rusted trumpet as the wind pressed against it. Sam pushed it open, letting daylight spill into the suffocating dark beyond. Evelyn hesitated, inhaling sharply before stepping through the threshold. At once, the air changed, thick with sulfur and smoke, dry as sand filling her lungs. Inside, stray light streamed through broken windows, scattering into clouds of dust adrift in the gloom. Beneath their feet, thousands of shards cracked faintly with each step, a fragile warning. Rusted iron tables lay smothered in ash, glass-blowing molds sprawled like hollowed corpses. Jagged panes stood upright, fractured, their reflections twisting the three figures into distorted shadows that danced across the dark. Sam led the way, his flashlight carving a sharp path through the black, shards glittering like crystal. Evelyn followed slowly, her body weighed down by invisible heaviness. Each time the beam swung away, the darkness pressed in behind her, thick, suffocating. Mark walked silently at the rear, one hand trailing along the cold wall, as if searching for stability in the growing unease. The deeper they moved, the hotter the air grew. Not the muggy heat of the afternoon, but a dry, searing breath, as though the furnace still smoldered somewhere within. Sweat prickled Evelyn's skin, yet when she wiped it away, her palm burned as if she had touched heated iron. At the center of the hall, the furnace towered, blackened, scarred. Its gaping mouth yawned like a wound that refused to heal. There was no fire, yet waves of oppressive heat pulsed from its walls. Around its charred mouth, dark handprints marred the brick, warped, grotesque. Evelyn blinked, and for a moment she swore they twitched, struggling to claw their way out. A faint sound stirred. Glass cracking. Sam swept his beam toward it. The light struck a tall pane of glass, thick and fractured, where a handprint pressed clear against the inside. Translucent, full, alive, veins faintly visible beneath its pale surface. Evelyn froze, heart hammering. Mark stepped back half a pace, eyes tense. The hand didn't move. Then in a blink it vanished, leaving only a smooth reflection, their faces blurred, stretched, distorted. The silence in the factory tightened, as if the building itself held its breath. And somewhere, very faint, the sound returned. A brittle crack, like human bones shattering within frozen crystal. Now, the air inside the factory grew heavier, thicker. Evelyn could feel the heat radiating from the walls, as though the entire building breathed slowly. Each exhale, a scorching wave pressed against her skin. She paused, trying to draw in a breath, but her chest seared, filled only with the stench of ash and the acrid burn of sulfur. Sam kept moving forward, his flashlight trembling across rows of rusted tables. Scattered on their surfaces lay old, glass-blowing tools, broken, cracked, coated in layers of dust. On one table rested a glassblower's mask, split in two. Its eye shield was blackened with soot, the surface fractured as though it had once exploded under unbearable heat. Mark picked it up, the beam of Sam's light refracting through the cracks into jagged rays, like the half-open eye of something long dead. He set it back down, but the clatter echoed unnaturally long, as if it were being hurled back from deep inside the furnace's core. Another sound stirred, a stretched, distorted moan, like a voice groaning from within the brick walls. Evelyn turned sharply, but no one was there. For a fleeting instant, she imagined the sound wasn't coming from outside at all, but from the very sheets of glass towering around them. The whole chamber seemed like a colossal lung, each pane exhaling waves of suffocating heat. Sam stopped before a tall pane leaning against the wall. The glass was hazy, yet the reflection staring back at him was no longer his own. His skin appeared translucent, gelatinous, with veins glowing like blood-soaked crystal. He raised his hand to the surface, and instantly, the pane rippled like water under a fingertip. Evelyn and Mark froze, horrified, as Sam's reflection slowly turned its head, while the real Sam stood motionless. The air glowed suddenly, eerily, as though a furnace somewhere had just roared back to life. On the brick walls, faint crimson light spilled upward, stretching their shadows into grotesque forms that mingled with shapes not belonging to any of them. Evelyn's eyes fixed on a figure staggering in the distance. Tall, body veined with glowing cracks, like molten glass splitting from within. Its eyes burned red, twin coals piercing the dark. The silence was so absolute that even a heartbeat struck like a hammer on metal. Then came a sharp, splintering crack, deafening through the chamber. A glass jar exploded on one of the tables, shards bursting outward, yet instead of falling, they hovered in the air for several seconds, before clattering to the floor with a shrill resonance that dragged on unnaturally long. Evelyn suddenly realized one presence was missing. The homeless man who had lingered near the factory was nowhere to be seen. She scanned the room and spotted, in a corner, a ragged coat slung across a broken chair. On the floor beneath it, glass fragments were smeared with congealed blood, glistening red, frozen into crystalline streaks. No body remained, only shards and blood trapped inside the glass like a jewel. The floor beneath Evelyn quivered faintly, as if some vast machine had stirred awake below them after decades of silence. The clicking sounds came in sequence, like a spectral rhythm tapped across thousands of shards. Mark pressed forward, jaw clenched, but each step of his boots rang out like bones splintering. The flashlight beam swung across leaning panes, where dozens of faces emerged faintly. It was impossible to tell if they were reflections, or people entombed within. Their eyes bulged wide, mouths frozen open in a voiceless scream, bodies transparent, sculpted in glass. Evelyn raised a trembling hand to her lips, smothering the scream that clawed her throat. What she saw was not only a haunting, but a warning of what awaited them. At the far end, the heat thickened, searing. In the red glow, the cracked figure still stood, unmoving, like a living statue. And when Evelyn blinked, it was gone, leaving only a glowing void in the factory's oppressive dark, each breath of heat rising like fire against her neck. Nay. I know. The air inside the factory grew so dense, it felt tangible. Evelyn stepped back, her hand gripping the edge of a rusted iron table. The heat pouring from the walls grew more intense, as if she were standing beside an immense fire. Yet in the quivering beam of the flashlight, there was nothing but darkness and the still slabs of glass towering around them. Sam stood before a large pane, and the face reflected back was no longer the familiar 19-year-old boy. His skin had become translucent, fragile like thin glass, with veins glimmering dark red, snaking across his body like fractures in crystal. Every movement produced a faint sound, the brittle creak of glass straining under pressure. Evelyn saw his body tremble as countless tiny cracks spread from within. Mark lunged forward to pull Sam away, but his touch met a skin as cold as the surface of ice. His palm left a foggy imprint on Sam's transparent arm, which vanished as soon as he let go. Sam panted, his chest rising and falling, each breath punctuated by a sharp crack, as though his ribs were being compressed inside a glass mold. From the shadows, another sound arose. A series of clicks, then silence. Evelyn lifted her head and realized they were no longer alone. Figures emerged from the dark, standing motionless in different corners of the workshop. They resembled statues more than humans, bodies transparent, faces frozen in expressions of horror, eyes wide open, mouths agape in voiceless screams. Some were cracked through, their forms webbed with fractures. Others still moved faintly, a stiff turn of the head or a jerking arm, each motion accompanied by the painful groan of breaking glass. Evelyn longed to close her eyes, but she couldn't look away. Each statue bore the shape of a real person, some clad in work overalls, some small as children, even the figure of a woman with long tangled hair, her face locked in terror. All of them imprisoned in eternal crystal, a transparent tomb. Mark, struggling to steady himself, approached a statue of a mail worker standing near an old furnace bench. He reached out to touch it. In an instant, the statue shattered into thousands of shards, spraying across the floor. Within the broken shell was a charred, crumbling skeleton. Its skull rolled, striking the ground with a hollow clack. Evelyn screamed hoarsely as ashen glass dust clouded the air. Through the haze, a tall figure emerged, broad shoulders hunched back, a body like scorched glass riddled with glowing fissures. On his distorted face, two burning coals for eyes. In his hand, a long glassblower's tongue, its tips glowing red as though just pulled from the furnace. Evelyn knew instantly who he was, the glassworker who had perished in the explosion. Yet here, he was neither man nor ghost. He was something forged from the disaster itself. Flesh fused with molten glass, a soul melded with fire, a being condemned to haunt the factory forever. The glassmaker moved slowly, but each step made the workshop tremble, punctuated by the brittle shatter of unseen glass. His eyes burned, fixed only on Sam. He raised the tong, and the suffocating heat rolled like a gust from the furnace mouth. Sam staggered, his legs cracking with each step, fractures spreading like roots along his transparent skin. Evelyn rushed forward to pull him away, but his body was already being drawn into the glass wall behind him. He clawed at it, face contorted, mouth open in a scream that never escaped. The wall softened, swallowing him whole. His hands thrashed in desperation, carving deep cracks into the pane. Mark shouted voicelessly, slamming his fists against the wall, but it only shuddered harder. Evelyn saw Sam's face blur behind the surface, his bloodshot eyes bulging wide, until his entire form vanished into the glass. His strangled scream reverberated, echoing across the workshop, multiplying through every pane surrounding them. The silence that followed was more terrifying than the noise. The glassmaker halted, tilting his head, as though listening to the fracture of a newly captured soul. And in that instant, Evelyn understood. He wasn't merely hunting intruders. He was collecting them, turning each into a living statue, adding them to his eternal gallery within the dead glassworks. Darkness consumed the space, leaving Evelyn and Mark surrounded by the silent statues, their glassy eyes following their every move. And deep within the panes, Evelyn saw Sam's eyes still open, locked on her, pleading from the other side of his transparent prison. Now, The factory sank into a crushing silence. Evelyn and Mark stood back to back, the flashlight trembling in their hands as its beams swept across the room. The crystal statues remained motionless, yet their transparent eyes seemed to track every subtle movement. And in the center, the towering shadow of the glassmaker loomed, his chest rising and falling as though still filled with the breath of a fire long extinguished. A low hum rose, deep and heavy, vibrating through the concrete beneath their feet. Evelyn realized it came from the far end of the workshop, the old furnace. The circular steel pit, rusted and thought long dead, now glowed a searing red, as though a colossal heart had begun to beat again. Waves of blistering air surged outward, carrying the stench of scorched metal and tar. Mark seized Evelyn's arm, urging retreat, but the massive glass panes along the walls slid into place, cutting off every exit. They rearranged themselves into jagged partitions, reflecting endless duplicates of their figures. Evelyn saw dozens of her own trembling images, all trapped in the crimson glare like imprisoned phantoms. A crack resounded, then another. The statues began to stir, slowly, deliberately. Some twisted their heads, revealing fissures that gleamed beneath their crystalline skin. Others raised stiff arms, their joints snapping with metallic clicks. Each movement birthed the brittle sound of splintering glass, swelling into a grotesque chorus. Evelyn felt it then. The glassmaker had no intention of killing them outright. He meant to herd them toward the furnace, toward the final fire. A ritual, a recreation of the accident that had forged him. He dragged his long tongs across the floor, the shriek of metal sparking a thin trail of fire. Evelyn glimpsed Mark's face, jaw clenched, eyes wide, His strength eroded into a child's trembling fear. Step by step, they were forced back toward the furnace. The air thickened, the heat so intense it evaporated their sweat the moment it touched their skin. Each breath felt like swallowing shards of glass. Evelyn coughed violently, but clung to Mark's arm to stay upright. And then she saw Sam. In the glass wall to the left, his face emerged clearly, eyes burning red, skin fractured into jagged shards. Sam pounded on the surface, but no sound escaped. Only the sharp spreading of cracks answered him. His mouth opened in a scream, his throat straining, and Evelyn heard a faint echo within her mind. "Help me!" The sight nearly buckled her knees, but the glassmaker allowed no pause. He swung his tongs, and a blast of furnace wind hurled them sprawling before the fiery maw. The furnace's red light bathed their faces, and Evelyn's tear-filled eyes reflected like fractured crystal. Mark struggled to his feet, pulling Evelyn up, but a crystalline hand clamped around his ankle. A worker statue, its frozen eyes locked wide, dragged him backward. Mark kicked desperately, shattering it to pieces, but 3 more statues blocked the way, their arms stretching like jagged glass branches. Evelyn's gaze swept the room, and dread hollowed her chest. They were encircled, hemmed in by a tightening ring of living statues. Each crackling fracture echoed like a drumbeat, driving them closer to the furnace. The glassmaker raised his tongs high, lowering them slowly in a solemn gesture. This was no impulsive strike. It was judgment, a ritual sacrifice. The furnace's glow reflected across his body, illuminating the molten lines coursing through his cracked flesh like lava veins in transparent stone. In that moment, Evelyn understood. He intended to melt them down in the fire, to recast them as eternal crystal effigies, silent additions to his growing army within the factory. A sharp crack thundered above. Evelyn looked up to see a rusted steel beam giving way, the massive pane of glass suspended from it swaying wildly. Instinct screamed. This was their only chance. With every ounce of strength, she lunged at Mark, dragging him aside just as the enormous pane came crashing down. The impact shook the entire workshop. Glass exploded outward in a storm of glittering shards, slicing into their skin. The glassmaker staggered, his burning eyes swirling with fury. Bleeding but resolute, Evelyn and Mark struggled to their feet. Behind the furnace, she glimpsed a narrow gap, an old passage blocked by steel panels. If they could reach it, they might escape the circle. But to get there, they would have to go through the glassmaker. He turned toward them, each fissure on his body trembling as though ready to burst. Behind him, the furnace blazed brighter than ever, its flames howling for more souls. And Evelyn knew then, the final act of the nightmare was upon them. Oh, aye. The roar of the furnace thundered like a colossal heartbeat, relentless, demanding. Evelyn and Mark ran in desperation, the searing heat clawing at their backs. The narrow gap behind the furnace was only a few meters away, but the glassmaker blocked the way, his body glowing red like a mirror forged from fire. Mark did not stop. He charged straight at the creature, his bare hands slamming into its crystalline chest. A piercing crack echoed, shards splintering deep into his flesh. Yet he held on, forcing the monster back toward the furnace. Evelyn screamed, her eyes blurred with tears, but Mark never turned. "Run!" His voice was a faint whisper, swallowed by the roar of the flames. Evelyn understood. She turned away and hurled herself toward the gap. The glassmaker shrieked, raising its tongs, but Mark tightened his grip, dragging the creature down with him into the furnace's blazing mouth. Light erupted, the whole chamber igniting in an inferno. For a fleeting instant, Evelyn saw Mark's figure breaking apart, his flesh splintering into burning crystal shards, merging with the blaze. Then he was gone, swallowed along with the monstrous shadow of the glassmaker. Evelyn collapsed, her heart tearing with pain. But the fire did not die. Instead, it raged higher, fed by blood and soul. Cracks tore open along the furnace walls, molten light blazing through, flooding the workshop with searing brilliance. In panic, she crawled toward the gap, scraping her body through. Her hand sliced against a shard of glass, blood streaking crimson. Behind her, a terrible howl shook the air. Not Mark's, not the glassmaker's, but something fused of both. She dragged herself through at last, tumbling into the dry grass outside. The night wind bit cold against her wounds, but still in her ears the sounds echoed, shattering glass, strangled screams, breaking from within the furnace hall. She turned once more. The shattered windows blazed, reflecting hundreds of translucent faces pressed against the glass. Among them, Evelyn saw Mark, his eyes frozen, his mouth gaping in an eternal silent cry. Beside him was Sam, still screaming from behind a fractured pane. The glassworks fell silent again, save for the red glow pulsing from the cracks in its walls. Evelyn lay on the ground, eyes wide, knowing she had escaped, but would never truly be free. For in the night wind, she still heard it. The faint, brittle sound of glass breaking, as if hundreds of hands were pressing from the other side of the mirror, waiting for the day she would return. Neum. Within the abandoned asylum, rusted wires bite into effigies suspended in endless decay. Their hollow forms sway gently, as if lulled by a breath that no longer belongs to the living. When night falls, the silence fractures. The figures convulse, their heads twisting in unison to a broken funereal rhythm. Jonah pulled the car to a halt on the gravel road, where withered trees stretched their skeletal branches toward the ashen sky. Before him loomed the asylum, a corpse of concrete and steel, windows shattered, walls peeled and veined with moss. Clara stepped out, her old camera slung over her shoulder, eyes caught between curiosity and dread. They had heard the stories whispered 100 times before. Muffled cries echoing down the corridors, shadows dangling in broken windows, and always the same dreaded name, Dr. Harland. Jonah recounted to Clara the rumors of Harland's puppet therapy, drilling into skulls, wiring patients so their bodies could be made to dance. Many dismissed it as grotesque folklore, but others swore those experiments were the very reason the asylum was shuttered overnight. They pushed at the rust-eaten steel doors. Hingis screamed, the sound dragging down the hallway like metal tearing bone. Inside, the stench of ancient disinfectant mingled with mildew, as though the air itself had been trapped since the 60s. Clara lifted her camera, snapping shot after shot. Rusted bed frames, suffocating corridors, padded cells gone rotten with mold. Jonah led the way, jotting notes. Clara said nothing, only pressed her shutter again, as though afraid the building's truth might vanish if she didn't capture it fast enough. Darkness thickened as daylight drained from the high windows, swallowing the halls whole. They stopped at the threshold of the great auditorium, where a collapsed wooden stage waited under a ceiling of rusting beams. Jonah felt his own footsteps strike too loud, the echoes bouncing back as though someone unseen matched his pace. Clara drew in a breath, her lens trembling as she tilted it toward the rafters. A sudden flash erupted. For the briefest instant, Jonah glimpsed something. Someone suspended high above. Then blackness reclaimed it. He craned his neck upward, heart pounding, while the air grew heavier, pressing on his chest. From somewhere deep within the asylum came a sound, a drawn-out metallic screech, like strings being tested in the dark. Clara's whisper cracked the silence. "We're not the only ones here." Jonah flicked on his flashlight, its narrow beam slicing through the dark. The light swept across the steel rafters above, and his breath caught. Shapes dangled from the beams. From a distance, they looked like patients in tattered hospital gowns, but their skin was gray, stiff, and lifeless as wood. Clara lowered her camera, hands trembling. She had managed one last shot before the flash revealed the horrific truth. One of the figures twitched, a hand jerking slightly, its neck bent at an unnatural angle as if yanked by invisible reins. Jonah swore every hollow eye socket had turned toward them. A chorus of metallic shrieks echoed overhead. The wires shuddered, pulling the hanging forms taut. Then they moved, not with the fluidity of the living, but stiff and jerky, like wooden marionettes forced to dance. Heads snapped in unison, arms lifted, legs curled, all to a rhythm only they could hear. Jonah staggered back against the wall, cold sweat breaking across his skin. He remembered the patient files he'd studied. Rumors of skulls drilled open, wires fed into spines, bodies turned into living puppets. He had never believed it. Not until now. Clara clutched his arm, whispering, They're still being controlled, but by who?" A heavier movement drew their eyes upward. From the shattered stage at the far end of the hall, something massive was rising. It was no longer a man, but a grotesque fusion of steel cables, rotting wood, and clattering joints. A face patched together, half man, half puppet, hung above a hulking body. Jonah knew instantly who it was, Dr. Harland, or what remained of him. The giant puppet bent low, its elongated arms sweeping wide. When it yanked a lever of wire, every dangling patient screamed in unison, a cacophony of cracking wood, grinding joints, and rusted hinges shrieking. The sound drove Clara to her knees, hands clamped over her ears. Jonah tried to haul her up, his eyes locked on the advancing horde. From the rafters, wires slithered downward like roots, snaking toward the floor, carrying the stench of rust and blood. There was only one choice left: flee deeper into the asylum's maze, or be hoisted up as another lifeless puppet. Jonah gripped Clara's hand hard and shouted, "Run!" Their footsteps thundered down the corridor, chased by the mad symphony of shrieking wires and the wooden convulsions of puppets dancing to their unseen master's tune. Wah! The narrow corridor stretched into infinity. Every step Jonah and Clara took echoing like a death knell. The trembling beam of the flashlight swept across half-open iron doors, their nameplates faded with time. Room 12, Special Therapy, Room 23, Behavioral Experiments. Wind hissed through cracks in the walls, sounding like the labored breaths of invisible patients. Jonah ran, forcing his lungs into rhythm. In his mind, the asylum's cryptic notes spun in a vicious cycle, Marionette therapy, restoring willpower through external control. He had never believed anyone could be cruel enough to attempt such things. But now the truth dangled on wires behind them, swaying in pursuit. Clara halted, pointing to a door left ajar. The faint red lettering still lingered. Operating room. "Jonah, we have to look," she gasped. "There might be answers inside." Jonah hesitated. Every instinct screamed at him to keep running, but Clara's gaze, terrified yet unyielding, pulled him forward. Together, they shoved the door open. The operating room lay in darkness, save for a few dangling bulbs. One flickered to life with a sickly yellow glow, spotlighting the center table. There, shackled in place, lay the skeleton of a patient. Ribcage punctured, spine threaded with rusted wires. Clara lifted her camera and clicked. The flash burst across the back wall, unveiling a grotesque mosaic, dozens of sketches tacked side by side. Human bodies redrawn as puppets, their joints hinged with steel, every pencil stroke marking a drill wound. In the center hung the largest draft, its title scrawled in bold. Project Marionette, Total Control. Jonah's stomach twisted. He stepped closer, trembling fingers brushing the smeared ink. At the corner, a signature still lingered. Crooked, desperate, Harland, 1963. A sudden clang of metal jolted them. They spun around as the ceiling cracked, wires slithering downward to coil around the skeleton's limbs. The corpse jerked violently, then sat upright, jaw grinding with a splintering rasp. Dot. Clara screamed, while Jonah dragged her into the corner. The puppet corpse staggered forward, wires threaded through its eye sockets and chest, twitching with each unnatural step. Every footfall was the sound of wood splintering, every pull of the wires a discordant note. From the distance came a voice, low and rhythmic, like a conductor's count. 1, 2, 3. Jonah froze. Harland was orchestrating the entire asylum like a stage, each puppet moving to his cadence. He squeezed Clara's hand, eyes locked on the narrow exit across the room. "Run, when I say now." The puppet advanced, iron arm swinging down. Jonah zeised a rusted bar from the floor and swung upward, clashing against the blow. The screech of metal on metal shrieked through the room, sparks flying. In that instant, Clara dashed through the door, Jonah racing after her. They plunged into another corridor, leaving behind the relentless beat echoing through the asylum, louder, heavier, as if the building itself had a pulse. Jonah gasped for air, one truth burning inside him. Unless they destroyed the thing at the center of it all, they too would be dragged upward to dangle among the others, lifeless marionettes swaying in Harland's grip. Nisai, never way. The metallic shrieks of the wires still trailed them, but Jonah was beginning to notice a pattern. The cadence, 1, 2, 3, echoed from deep within the asylum, steady as a war drum. Each time the rhythm quickened, the puppets they encountered in the corridors twitched awake, turning in unison toward them. "Clara," he whispered, "the sound guides them. If we follow it, we'll find where Harland is pulling the strings." Clara nodded, her face pale, but a spark of resolve flickered in her eyes. She clutched the camera as if it were the last weapon she had. They descended a rotting spiral staircase. Dust coated the steps, clawed with endless gouges where wires had scraped across the stone. Jonah's hand skimmed a damp brick wall, the chill sinking into his skin like a parasite. As they dropped another level, the beat grew clearer, merging with the taut whine of wires pulled too tight, like a violin tuned past breaking. At the bottom stood a massive iron door. 2 words were carved into its surface: Control Ward. It hung slightly ajar, and through the crack spilled a red glow, pulsing with every count of the rhythm. Jonah drew a sharp breath and pushed it open. Inside lay a circular chamber, its ceiling a high dome from which hundreds of wires dangled like metallic roots. Each tether fed into colossal gears that churned with a grinding tempo. And at the very center, enthroned upon a towering chair, sat the husk of Dr. Harlan. His body was no longer whole. Half his face had rotted away, yet his eyes remained open, milky and unblinking. Wires pierced his ribs, spine, even the skull itself, latching him into the machinery. Each turn of the gears yanked his body in violent spasms, and with every jolt came the thunder of puppets shifting above. Clara covered her mouth, choking back a scream. Jonah could not look away. This was no mere mad doctor. Harlan had transformed himself into the mechanical heart of the asylum, a grotesque puppeteer wired to his own stage. Suddenly, Harlan's eyes swiveled, locking onto them. A voice rolled out, not from his mouth, but from every wire, reverberating through the chamber as though the building itself spoke. The final audience has arrived. The wires shuddered, glowing red-hot. From the fissures in the walls, the patients emerged, dozens of them, shuffling forward. Wooden hands and iron limbs scraped across the floor, closing the circle. Jonah dragged Clara back toward the far corner. His mind raced. He couldn't fight this army. But if Harlan was the center, destroying the machinery might end it all. "Clara, listen," he hissed, urgent. "We have to break the main gear. If it stops, everything stops with it." Clara swallowed hard, then nodded. She clutched the camera tighter, ready to hurl it if it meant shattering steel. The puppets advanced, the circle closing in. Harlan's laughter rattled through the dome, blending with the screech of grinding gears, a death orchestra swelling to crescendo. Jonah tightened his grip on the rusted iron bar, eyes locked on the glowing heart of the machine. There was only one chance: to strike before the wires closed in, before they too were bound, suspended among the asylum's collection of lifeless marionettes. Wah! Jonah tightened his grip on the iron rod, his heart pounding like a war drum. The puppets closed in, their hollow eyes gleaming, wires shrieking as they strained. At the center, Harlan convulsed with each grinding turn of the gears, half his ruined face curled into a grotesque smile. The audience must join the final act, his voice echoed through the dome, drawn out like a warped lullaby. With a roar, Jonah charged the machine. The iron rod slammed into the blazing gear, sparks bursting in a violent spray. The mechanism shuddered, wires slackened, and the puppets staggered in confusion. Clara screamed his name, her eyes wide with terror. But Harlan would not yield. Wires slashed down from the rafters, coiling around Jonah's arm, wrenching him into the grinding maw. His body jolted violently, blood streaking across steel, mingling with the pulsing red glow. Clara rushed forward, clawing to free him, but Jonah's trembling hand pressed against her chest, stopping her. "Clara, run," he gasped, tears brimming in his eyes. "Let me end this." Her scream cracked the silence, but the wires twisted tighter, dragging Jonah into the core of the machine. With the last breath of his strength, he raised the rod and drove it down. The gear split apart with a thunderous crack. Light flared, then died. Silence swallowed the chamber. The puppets collapsed where they stood, strings cut, lifeless. Harlan's body crumbled with them, torn to rusted wire and rotted bone. Clara fell to her knees. Before her lay only shattered metal and a smear of blood, the last trace of Jonah. He had been consumed by the machine he destroyed. Beyond the asylum walls, dawn broke at last. Pale light crept through shattered windows, but in Clara's eyes it reflected nothing but a hollow void. The memory of Jonah and the shriek of steel wires would haunt her forever, like a play that refused to end, its curtain never falling. And PC. Since the mid-20th century, whispers have lingered about a carnival that vanished in the 1930s. Whenever a blood moon climbs the sky, a strange music seeps across the abandoned fields, discordant, lilting, impossible to place. The curious who pass through the gate will find lights glowing, rides turning, and performers smiling with hollow mirth. But every game demands its price, and the final prize is to become an eternal act in the carnival of shadows. Wendun. Alex Carter was no stranger to strange rumors. As a freelance journalist, he had chased stories of haunted houses, lake monsters, even the lingering curses of forgotten towns. Yet, the tale that drew him into the Appalachian hills unsettled him more than the rest. A carnival that vanished in the 1930s, reappearing only beneath the glow of a blood moon. He did not come alone. Beside him was Maggie Holt, a photographer who had followed him through many hunts for the bizarre. Together they drove the worn car along winding mountain roads, the horizon bleeding red, as if the sky itself were leaking thin, diluted blood. The field where the carnival was said to rise stretched out in desolate silence, nothing but brittle grass the color of ash. No banners, no stalls, no trace of celebration, only a silence so heavy it seemed to swallow their breath. Alex checked his watch. The lunar eclipse was minutes away from its darkest point. They waited. A sudden wind swept the plain, lifting dust into twisting columns. From the emptiness came a sound, low, warped, unmistakably brass, as though a trumpet were groaning from deep underground. Red light washed across the field, and from nowhere a gate materialized, its frame a curve of rusted black iron. Above it hung a sign that shimmered unnaturally, Black Carnival. Alex held his breath. Maggie raised her camera, but through the lens there was nothing solid. Only shapes writhing like shadows that refused to be captured, as though the place rejected being recorded. Beyond the gate, faint lights flickered. A wooden carousel creaked to life, horses moving in slow circles. Children's laughter echoed faintly, though the field was empty of children. The air was thick with sweetness, like spun sugar left too long in the heat, clashing with the sharp tang of something metallic and rotten. Alex felt his pulse hammer in his throat. This was no folk tale. Something real had risen from the void before them. He turned to Maggie. No words passed, only a single grim nod. The gate creaked open, and their first step inside the Black Carnival rang out like a binding vow. one from which no one ever turned back. The air inside the carnival was heavy with sweetness, but the sweetness choked like smoke, burnt sugar laced with the bite of rust. Along the midway, booths glowed with sickly yellow bulbs, colors bright at first glance, yet collapsing on closer inspection into warped wood and peeling paint. From somewhere unseen, a brass band wheezed out broken notes, the melody lurching between low groans and sharp shrieks, never finding rhythm. Out of the haze, a towering man appeared, cloaked in black and white stripes. His face was hidden beneath a cracked mask, only his eyes exposed, burning like furnace coals. When he spoke, his voice rattled through the air as if funneled through a broken loudspeaker. Welcome, new guests. Come play with us. Every game carries its own reward. Alex and Maggie exchanged a wary glance. Curiosity gnawed at Alex, pulling him toward the ring toss booth. Rows of glass bottles waited, their throats impossibly narrow. He tossed the first ring, and against all odds, it landed. A stuffed bear, threadbare and sagging, was pressed into his hand. But as Alex gripped the prize, pain tore through his finger. His pinky nail snapped free, blood welling. The bear absorbed it instantly, its fabric staining dark red before drying, the color sinking into its seams like a permanent scar. Maggie recoiled, but the masked man only let out a jagged laugh. Every prize must be paid for. You have already agreed. Defiant, Maggie stepped to the strength tester. She swung the mallet down, and the gauge's needle shot to the top. Lights burst in a sudden flare. Her prize was a porcelain doll, already fractured with hairline cracks. The moment she lifted it, her palm split open, as though the skin had been peeled away in a single strip. Blood smeared across the doll's porcelain face, seeping into its lips until they gleamed crimson. Alex yanked her back, his heart hammering. He understood now. Every carnival game here was fed by flesh and blood. The prizes were no trinkets at all, but parasites feeding on what the players lost. From deeper within the carnival, the music surged. Drums and horns, urgent, commanding them forward. The masked man spread his arms like a grotesque master of ceremonies, voice booming with glee. This is only the beginning. The true performance awaits. Ahead, a rotting wooden door creaked open, revealing a funhouse of mirrors. Thousands of distorted reflections stared back, bending and twisting like bodies drowned in red water. The blood moon's glow poured through the glass, every reflection rippling as though alive. A chill crawled up Alex's spine. The carnival was tightening its grip, and with every step, they had already wagered their own flesh. Neem. Eyes. The mirror tent sealed shut behind Alex and Maggie, as if an unseen hand had slammed the door from outside. Dim crimson light seeped through the heavy canvas, scattering into endless shards across the mirrors. With every step, their reflections multiplied, dozens, then hundreds, stretching long, twisting grotesquely into shapes that no longer resembled human forms. The carnival's music faded into the distance, replaced by a soft undercurrent, like whispers bleeding from the glass itself. Alex halted, pulse racing. In the mirror's warped reflection, his face was no longer whole. One side splintered, his eyes black and glossy like glass on the verge of shattering. Maggie pressed onward, but her footsteps dragged across something sharp. Alex looked down and froze. The ground was no longer carpeted with dust and cloth, but covered in jagged fragments of glass, each shard streaked with dried blood. Maggie trembled, clutching the porcelain doll from before. The doll stirred in her hands, its cracked eyes fluttering open as if waking from a dream. Suddenly, a thunder of applause erupted. Both of them spun around. At the far end of the mirrored hall, a stage revealed itself, lit by a pallid glow. Dozens of spectators sat in silence. Their bodies were rigid, skin pale, eyes locked wide open. At first, they seemed like wax figures, but as Alex drew closer, dread curdled in his stomach. They were real, human.pie. Their souls had been hollowed out, leaving only husks. A few still breathed shallowly, lips twitching as if to beg for help, though no sound escaped. Maggie stumbled back, colliding with a mirror. The surface rippled, and another figure appeared, her reflection but hollow-eyed, its mouth slashed open in a grin that reached ear to ear. The reflection thrust its hand through the glass, clawing her skin. Purple welts spread across her arm, as though her very soul was being torn away. Maggie screamed, but the sound warped and dissolved, devoured by the maze. Alex dragged her free, only to find the stage empty. The silent audience had vanished, leaving behind rows of rotting wooden seats, stained with dark patches of blood. The air thickened, pressing down with the weight of countless unseen eyes. A laugh boomed from above, the laugh of the masked master of ceremonies. The audience is ready. The next act is yours. At once, the mirrors blazed with light, then cracked in unison. From the fractures burst blackened limbs, jointed and sharp, like the broken pieces of marionettes clawing their way out. The maze shuddered, splinters raining down, the shriek of breaking glass colliding with the chaos of carnival music. Alex fought wildly, blood smearing the mirrors as his hands were torn open. Wherever his blood touched, the shards ignited, glowing like fire. Maggie swung the porcelain doll at the creature's grasping arms, each impact unleashing a shrill, childlike wail that pierced the air. They pushed forward, desperation fueling their escape, until at last a narrow gap appeared, a passage out. They hurled themselves through it, tumbling onto damp, cold earth. Behind them, the mirror tent convulsed, then collapsed inward, vanishing into a void of nothingness. But the laughter remained. The MC's voice coiled through the air like prophecy, echoing inside their skulls. No one leaves before the carnival is finished. Yeah. They stumbled out of the mirror tent, breath ragged, their clothes smeared with blood and glass dust. Before them spread a vast square at the heart of the carnival, bathed in the crimson blaze of the blood moon. At its center lay a wide circle, etched in black ash and dried blood, encircling a tall wooden post, weathered, splintered, unmistakably an execution stake. Figures in black cloaks began to emerge, one by one. Each wore a cracked jester mask, teeth rotting and yellow beneath the fractured grins. They gathered slowly, their movements deliberate, swaying in rhythm as though locked in some grotesque dance. The carnival's music shifted into a funereal pounding, drums dull and hollow, like the heartbeat of the damned. Alex and Maggie crouched behind a decayed booth, watching. A young man was bound to the post, a filthy rag stuffed between his teeth. Blood trickled from his hands, raw flesh torn where the skin had been stripped away. His face was ashen, eyes wide with the last desperate plea of a man who already knew there would be no rescue. One of the cloaked figures stepped forward, voice booming, drawn out, reverberating like a sermon from beneath the earth. The blood moon rises. The pact is renewed. Blood for soul. Soul for endless delight. The crowd echoed the words in unison, a chant, ancient and steady, vibrating through the bones. Alex felt his veins turn cold. This was no game. This was ritual, older than memory, fed by sacrifice. The carnival lived, and it feasted on the living. The bound man thrashed as another masked figure approached. The weapon it carried was not a blade, not an axe, but a rod glowing with a sickly neon red, pulsing like a vein of fire. The rod pierced his chest. Light burst from the wound, not the light of blood, but the tearing brilliance of a soul being ripped free. His body collapsed, hollowed, nothing more than a husk. The crowd erupted in cheers, laughter clanging and brittle as iron scraping stone. Maggie shook, tears shimmering in her eyes. Alex gripped her hand, whispering hoarsely, "We have to escape before it's us." But even as he spoke, dread cut through him. The gate they had entered by was gone. Around them stretched only rows of booths, endless, a labyrinth with no way out. From above, the MG's voice descended, sharp and merciless, each word a decree. The newcomers have played their first game. The pact has claimed them. The next act is their sacrifice. As one, the cloaked congregation turned, dozens of cracked masks locking onto the shadows where Alex and Maggie hid. The sound of footsteps followed, slow and deliberate, pounding like the carnival's own heart. Alex drew in a sharp breath, clutching the blood-stained teddy bear, the cursed prize that had already tasted him. Maggie held the porcelain doll, its glassy eyes glittering as if infused with the soul it had devoured. They both knew now. The games had carried them too far. They were no longer spectators. Under the blood moon, they were the chosen offering. Now! Ow! The drums pounded like a colossal heart, their rhythm echoing across the carnival. The masked crowd closed in, hollow eyes fixed upon Alex and Maggie. At the center of the square, the execution post rose again, waiting for its next sacrifice. Alex gripped Maggie's trembling hand, feeling her fear vibrate through his own bones. He knew there was no escape. The gate was gone, the carnival sealed tight around them, like the jaws of a vast predator. The prizes they carried now pulsed with menace. The blood-stained teddy bear, the porcelain doll with burning eyes. They whispered in voices only he and Maggie could hear, urging them toward the circle of sacrifice. The masked mech emerged, towering, his shadow engulfing the square. His voice thundered, drawn out and merciless. The audience waits. The carnival demands a new act. And you, Alex, you will light the stage. Two cloaked figures lunged, seizing Alex in arms cold as iron. He fought, thrashing wildly, but their grip was unbreakable. Maggie screamed, rushing forward only to be hurled aside. The porcelain doll shattered in her hands, and from its broken shell poured the shrill cries of children, echoing into the darkness. They bound Alex to the post. The blood moon blazed down, painting his skin in a suffocating red glow. The MC lifted the glowing rod, burning like a coal ripped from hell, and pressed it to Alex's chest. Agony ripped through him, but Alex did not scream. His gaze locked on Maggie, despair and resolve mingling in his eyes. "Run!" he roared, his voice folding into the thunder of drums. Light erupted. Blood and soul tore free. unraveling into ribbons of crimson that spiraled through the air. His body convulsed, splitting open, bones snapping, flesh melting into molten wax that dripped and hardened into something new. When the glow faded, Alex was gone. In his place stood a towering carnival effigy, a grotesque figure with hollow eyes and a smile carved impossibly wide. The crowd erupted, applause crashing like thunder, laughter jagged and metallic. The new performer bowed low, a grotesque parody of gratitude, as though Alex himself were welcoming the audience to his debut. Maggie collapsed to her knees, tears flooding her face. But the carnival allowed her no time to grieve. The torches gutted out, plunging the square into darkness. When light returned, the crowd was gone. The post had vanished. She was alone, stranded in the middle of a barren, windswept field. At her feet lay the teddy bear, its stitches soaked dark with Alex's blood. Its button eyes glowed faintly, like embers refusing to die. And Maggie understood. Alex had not escaped. He had been claimed, forever bound to the carnival. Far away, faint music stirred once more, Calliope notes curling through the night air. A promise that when the blood moon returned, the Black Carnival would open its gates again, waiting for the next curious soul to wander inside. All night,